experience I had, I remember when I was preaching a sermon down in Mexico with a team I took down there to do evangelism. And I was really close to my team members, one in particular, a brother, and we were discussing how could I keep everyone engaged with what I was talking about on Sunday night, because I was going to preach later that evening. And of course, I needed an interpreter too, because I was going to preach to a Spanish-speaking congregation, and so I would need an interpreter. And how could I keep them tracking with me? How could I know that they were listening? And there was a time later that evening, while I was actually preaching, that I scanned the audience, just like I'm doing right now. You're all looking at me. And I was wondering what they were thinking about. And so I stopped in the middle of my sermon. I said, "What are you thinking?" And it was interesting because after I finished preaching that night, the person I had that discussion with prior said, "You really busted me." He said, "I was actually thinking about the great tamales I was going to eat at the host house I was going to after." He wasn't thinking about what I was saying at all. And, so it just makes me wonder about this instance that we're heading into in Luke 12. And I wouldn't personally be offended if some of you are not really paying close attention right now. The longer you preach, the more difficult it is for people to pay attention. I think people say the most that you can hope for is like 20 minutes, but hopefully it's more than that. But anyway, I wouldn't be offended if some of you are thinking about other things, maybe even right now. Like, what am I going to do after church? Where am I going to have lunch? I have all this homework to do when I get home. It's just amazing the things that crowd into our mind and keep us from listening. Now, Jesus has just talked about some pretty weighty things in the previous chapter. He's talked about pretty solemn matters, not fearing God enough, not fearing God more than men. Men can only destroy your body, but Jesus goes on to say, you have to fear God because he can take care of your body and your spirit forever. And he addressed some he said, whoever confesses me, the Son of Man on earth, I will confess before the angels of God in heaven. But he said, whoever denies me before the angels of God, I will deny them as well. But this is just out of the crowd. I mean, like he's been talking about other stuff. This guy pipes up and says, tell my brother to share the inheritance with me. And it just goes to show you, he wasn't listening at all. He came there with an agenda. So he said, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. Now, if I had been Jesus, I probably would have thought, were you listening to anything I just said? I mean, because it's totally out of context. It's like if you're preaching on something and somebody asks a question that's totally unrelated. He wanted his problem fixed. That's why he came to hear what Jesus had to say. Jesus was a rabbi, and it was common for in Jewish culture for the oldest brother to receive 2/3 of the inheritance and the younger brother to receive 1/3 of the inheritance. So he thought, that's unfair. So I'm going to get this very famous Jewish rabbi in the midst of all this confusion that was happening, and I'm just going to blurt it out. Tell him to split the inheritance with me. He thinks that Jesus is going to take care of this problem for him. And so it's interesting that Jesus' response, he thought this was unfair, the man did. I need to fight for my rights. Have you ever felt like that? I need to fight for my rights, and this is not fair. I should get half. You can understand that. Makes sense in a sense. But this man didn't even ask Jesus to consider all of the factors, like to really be an arbitrator who really looks at all the factors and tries to decide what's best. He just tells Jesus what to do, as if Jesus is going to listen to him. Tell my brother to divide the inheritance. So, refusing to intervene, Jesus is not going to do this. He says to him, man. And this kind of response is like an unsympathetic response. It's like if somebody questioned you and you're kind of taken back, it's like, sir. It's brusque. This man is responding to Jesus, and Jesus is responding back to him. He says, who appointed me an arbitrator or a judge over you? So Jesus' response was direct and somewhat aggravated. Jesus did not come to judge mundane matters involving possessions, but far more significant ones. And what Leon Morris said, Jesus did not come to bring men to God, he came to bring men to God, not to bring property to men. And that's true. So verse 14, who appointed me a judge and arbiter over you? Verse 15, and he said to him, and now here's the principle. This is the principle that Jesus is beginning to to go through here. Let me read the verse and break it down. Then he said to them, beware and be on your guard against every form of greed. Sometimes greed is translated in some of your translations, covetousness. So beware and be on your guard against every form of greed. And here's the principle. For not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions. And so beware is in the present imperative form. It means to observe, to recognize. It's like, watch out. Be careful that you're about this. Watch out. Recognize, perceive. And then it says to be on your guard. And that means to take care, look out for, avoid. So Jesus is saying, you be careful that you watch out for this, and not just for what I'm saying right now, but I think for all of us, because it's something we all have to be careful about. To be careful that there is no form of greed. And I think emphasizing form means that it could take a number of different manifestations in our life. Beware of this. Be careful about this, Jesus is saying. It could also be translated, as I said, covetousness, and it refers to an inordinate desire for riches, a strong desire to acquire more and more material possessions, to possess more than other people have, all irrespective of need. It can be like a competition, and that's what it's like today, isn't it? Don't people measure your success in life by what you have a lot of times? Isn't that true? The kind of car you drive, where you live, the neighborhood you live in, what's your yearly income. And Jesus is saying this can be very subtle, because in certain cultures it can be accepted as normative, but it's completely outside the excellency of Christ. And it's not wrong to work hard and to try and acquire things, especially when you have a family, you have a motivation to provide well for them, and I think that's fine, it's good. But we need to be careful about buying into the idea that the value of our life is measured by what we have. And everybody in this place that I'm speaking this to knows this to be true. But yet, even though we know it to be true, I think the deeper issue is it really true in our lives and how we think? It seems that this man was more motivated by greed and covetousness than by justice or fairness. He just wanted what he wanted. We always have reasons to justify our wrong motives, don't we? I mean, think about it. For everything that we do that is ungodly, we always have a reason that we give to God as a substitute for obedience. Like the Lord says, forgive this person, and we say, I'd be happy to do that, Lord, but unfortunately I can't because of what they did, or because if they have an apology. We got all these reasons as if the God is listening to them and saying, okay, now I understand I was wrong to ask. I mean, that's just pure folly. It can't be right. Greed or covetousness is actually a form of idolatry. To focus our lives on the acquisition of wealth is to worship and serve the creature rather than the creator, Romans 1:25. God is the only one that deserves that kind of care and worship. So that's the guiding principle stated when Jesus went on to say, not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions. Abundance translates from the verb which means to exceed or surpass, to have more than enough, to overflow. And such an abundance of possessions does not ensure real life. In fact, there's two words for life in Scripture in Greek. One is bios, which is talking about biological life. It's just you're alive. Then there's zoe, which is talking about the quality of life, which includes eternal life. And so he's essentially saying you cannot experience meaningful, purposeful life through the acquisition of things. It's only temporary. And the parable that he tells after this proves that it's only temporary. Listen, I'll read all from 16 through 20, then go back and go through the verse by verse. And he told them a parable. And this is what Jesus does. He usually is responding to something that someone says, and then he gives the principle. The principle is your life will never be measured in terms of what you possess. It cannot give you life in the truest sense. Now he's going to give an example through the form of a parable to illustrate this. And this is what people really remember, is they remember stories. And he was told them a parable saying, and it's probably not something that actually happened, it could have, the land of a rich man was very productive. And he began reasoning to himself, saying, what shall I do, since I have no place to store my crops? Then he said, this is what I will do. Here's a solution. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I shall store up all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, that's kind of funny, isn't it? You ever talk to yourself like that? Soul, you have many goods. You have many goods laid up for many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. Here comes the big surprise. Next verse. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your soul is required of you. Now who will own what you have prepared? So back to verse 16. So he told him this parable. The land of a rich man was very productive. No problem here, right? I mean, if you're successful in your life and you're doing it honestly and you're working hard, there's no problem. And in addition to this, since Israel was primarily an agrarian economy, they did some fishing in the Sea of Galilee, but they grew stuff. That's how they lived. They grew their crops, and they lived by the crops that they grew. And this man, he was very successful in what he did. Farmers are dependent upon the success on circumstances that are beyond their control. Did you ever think about that? I mean, you could be a very knowledgeable farmer, but if you don't have water, if it doesn't rain enough, or something goes wrong with the soil, you're not going to be successful. So this man, evidently, everything went well for him. He was very, very successful. And instead of thinking what he could do to express his thankfulness to God, who had provided rich soil and plenty of rain so that his crops were growing like crazy, he began reasoning to himself and say, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Next verse. So he started thinking about, well, I've got a problem here. I am so blessed that I don't have a place to put all the stuff I'm growing. What am I going to do? So selling the excess and flooding the market might drive down the prices that he could get. He could have given some of it away to the poor, but his solution was, next one, this is his solution. He said, this is what I will do. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and I will store my grain and my goods. And so he's going to build larger ones by rebuilding larger barns on the side of the existing ones. He would increase his storage capacity without having to build on productive cropland. So this guy's a shrewd businessman. He knows what he's doing. He's very successful at what he does. I think what maybe have entered into his thinking was he could control the flow to the market rather than share the abundance with others that he had decided to store. And he could still build at a higher rate. It's like production of oil today. If you produce too much oil, the price goes down, right? So most countries that are producing oil, they produce enough to make a good profit, but not so much so that there's an abundance of it, because that drives the price down. And so this guy's thinking, if I can't store all this grain, if I start selling it at a cheaper price, I'm not going to make as much money, or God forbid, I could share it with those who can't afford to buy it. So his solution, build bigger barns so I can store all of it away, control the flow of grain or whatever he was building, or whatever he was growing, out to the market and to the people. I can charge just as much because I'll have more, and I can control the flow. Smart. The selfish, narcissistic attitude is seen in the repetition of the pronouns used here. Listen, start with verse 16, and you kind of get an eye about what this person's thinking about. Then he said, he told him, verse 6, next, keep going when the guy starts talking. Next verse. I will, keep going backwards, sorry. Next, one more, there you go. And he began reasoning to himself and saying, this is what I will do, since I have no place to store my crops. Next verse. Then he said, this is what I will do. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and then I will store all my grain and my goods. Next verse. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have stored up many goods for many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, and marry. You can see he's a very narcissistic person. He's very consumed with what's best for him. And I think that's one of the things we can look at all those first-person pronouns. It comes through very clear. His only concern was, how could he use his resources for his maximum personal benefit? It's a picture of materialism, of a person who their total focus of their life is how can they gain more wealth and keep it. He's in verse 19, he's essentially saying, I have absolute financial security. Or to put it in another way, more colloquial terms, I've got so much that nothing can touch me now. I got all the bases covered. But as is so often the case with Jesus' stories, there was an unexpected twist in this one. Just when this man had imagined himself set up for life, God took his life. And he finished making his self-centered plans. God said, you fool. This very night your soul is required of you, and who will own what you have prepared? So it refers to a fool as someone who has thought they were smarter than they actually were. Glad this never happens to us. You could find several other scriptures that point out this principle so well. James 4:13 through 16. This is James in the Epistle of James 4:13. Come now. He's kind of baiting people. Come now, you who say, today and tomorrow we will go to such and such a city and spend there a year there and engage in business and make a profit. This is what we're going to do. Yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. You don't know what your life will be like tomorrow. I'm talking to you. I'm talking to me. We don't know. You are just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. We always have that idea that life is temporary, can change at any minute. You don't know what life is like tomorrow. Next verse. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. When we say, if the Lord wills, we're acknowledging that God is ultimately sovereign and ultimately in control of everything. I think to believe otherwise is presumptuousness. And so that's one verse that I think picks up the same thing. Ecclesiastes 2:18 and 19. This is Solomon. Solomon was the richest man in the ancient Near East. He had resources that are beyond our imagination for this time in history. I mean, he describes it all in certain chapters in Ecclesiastes. He had forests of living trees, hundreds of wives, built all these amazing things. And then when he got done with everything that he had built, he had everything you could want. This is his conclusion. Thus I hated all the fruit of my labor, for which I had labored under the sun. For I must leave it to the man who will come after me. Next verse. And who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool? Yet he will have control over all the fruit of my labor, for which I have labored by acting wisely under the sun. This too is vanity. So you can't take it with you. That's another way that we think about these things. The question is, where are our riches? On earth or in heaven? Jesus explains in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 16:19 through 20, that where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Our affection is located where our treasure is. Our attention, our energy, our passion is located where our treasure is. The idea of being rich towards God means that, I think the best way to describe it is that all that we have is His, ultimately. It's at His disposals. We are stewards, to be sure, but we're not owners. And as a result of that, because we realize that, we're generous people. We share with those in need because we realize it's not ours. We don't have the attitude that this man had. Some might argue that you can serve God and try to get rich at the same time. I think Jesus drew a pretty clear line against that. He said you cannot serve God and money. He did not say you should not. He said you cannot. So as I was thinking about this, I was just thinking, I think it's a natural and good thing to work hard and provide for your families. I think that's a gift from God, and I think it's a good thing for all of us to engage in. And I think especially for men who have families, they have a desire to provide. And I think that's right from the hand of the Lord. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's good. But I think there's some things to observe about greed and covetousness. One is, greed tends to ignore the lordship of Christ over everything. The man in this parable saw himself as the owner of all the land that he had. And you could see that by the notice, by the presence of all the I in his discussion of what he was going to do. He would have been in harmony with the proud and defiant words of William Henry Invictus when he said, quote, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." The greedy man is proud. If you ask the man, "How did you get this wealth?" he probably would have answered, "I got it by hard work, using my head with little lack of help from the weather," when entirely it was God's providential controlling of the weather that gave him everything he had. He was greatly blessed by God, but he thought it was his own hard work. I think all of us can fall into the trap of thinking that's what the reason we have what we have. I think greed or covetousness also ignores the priority of relationships over riches. You don't have to read between the lines to see that this man and his brother were not the best buddies at this point. Money had come between them. And this is a very dominant thing that happens today with siblings after their parents leave an inheritance. They argue over what's left over. The Bible is clear. The number one priority is to love God, and the number two priority is to love your neighbor as yourselves. Our love of money and the things is just a manifestation of our love, more of self-love than our love for each other and for God. Greed tends to ignore the shortness of the fact of eternity. It always ends. I guess the best way to put it is, whatever you acquire during this life, you can't take with you. Probably the only two things that are permanent are death and taxes. You've heard that before, right? Those are the only things that are inevitable. The fool thinks about his life, but he doesn't include God's judgment and eternity in his thoughts. I read something. 2 men were at a funeral of a wealthy man. The first man whispered to the second, "How much did he leave?" The second man replied, "He left it all." So just some questions to think about. And I have to ask myself these questions too, because one of the things that happens the older you get is you think, when you stop working, how are you going to take care of yourself? Or what are you going to leave behind for your kids? All those things are worthy of our attention, and we should be proactive in thinking about them. But I think some questions. Do my thoughts more often run after material things than after God himself? Just something to think about. Secondly, do I ever compromise godly character in pursuit of material gain? Do we do what's right even when it might not be the best decision for us financially? Do I enjoy material things more than I enjoy knowing God? I think God gives us things and we should enjoy those things, but God is the greatest source of joy we have. How do I respond when I lose material things? Some of you are old enough to have gone through the various market drops that we've had in the last 20 or 30 years. How did you look at that? I mean, there are some people that check their 401ks every day, just to make sure that everything is there. And I think that's okay, that's fine. I'm pretty much sure I do it. I just want to make sure that I can take care of my family and leave something to my children. I think that's a good thing, and I want everybody to understand that. I think the problem with this man is that he believed he was independent from God. He believed he could do anything that he wanted, and his security was based on his possessions. So I guess the thing to think about here more than anything else is greed can be prominent in many forms. Are we generous people? Do we respond to needs that we can meet, or do we prepare, or do we want to keep everything we have just so nothing can touch us? And I think that this man here, in this parable, that's what he was like. He didn't think anything could touch him. I will say to my soul, "Soul, you have many goods stored up for many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry." And then God came back with, "Well, I'm going to take your life tonight. Who's going to have everything that you left?" So just thinking about that as we move through this parable, I think it's a good way to kind of capture our thoughts in regard to material possessions, because there's something inherent in each one of us that is passionate about that. And it's very difficult to overcome, to have a good, healthy perspective on material wealth, working hard, providing for your family, while at the same time realizing the temporal nature of all that stuff. Can't take it with you? All right, James.